In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunskymysteries.com.
This is the 2009 Top 10 Webcam in the World winner. This is SETV.
Well, good evening, everybody. Bill Zam here. Welcome to our very special interview program. Normally we're on Tuesday nights, but this week we're on Wednesday nights. And for those of you that are joining us tonight live, we appreciate your patronage and indulgence in being watching the show. We have the audio stream going right now. We are recording the show, of course. We have the video stream going right now. Our regular audience will remember we used to have a lot of problems with our phone system. The constant lost calls, the noise on the lines, the hacking through the voice over IP issues. And then a simple solution presented itself to me, and we were off to the races once again. I was not thinking outside of the box. I was also in a very bad physical rut. Those of you that remember watching the show about a month and a half ago, I had a lot of arthritis pain. I was in constant pain. My arthritis was literally killing me. It was getting harder and harder to wake up in the morning. It was getting harder to sleep. It was horrible. I was gaining weight no matter what I did. And then we had a guest on the show that told me he would treat me pro bono and claimed that within 90 days I would be free from the pain. He was right. Again, I was not thinking outside of the box. That was a quantum change in my physical life. Tonight, you and I will both begin a quantum change in our psychological life, a very serious quantum change. We all need that change, and we need to bring it to as many people as possible as quickly as we can, to wake as many people up as possible. Wayne Birkin, the author of Wide Angle Vision, says, surprise occurs the moment we realize our view of the world no longer matches reality. I would submit the inverse is also can be said. When reality goes so topsy-turvy, too out of whack, when up becomes down, black becomes white, in is out, something is wrong. The key is to realize what that something is, and either change it or be aware, be awake, and let others know what you know. 4 years ago, I realized that I knew what I had learned. A lot of it was just plain trash. I had to set out relearning everything I had learned. I did it the hard way, without guidance. I did not know about tonight's guest and his book. If I had the painful process of waking up to do again in the real world, not that fake thing that is spoon-fed to us, it would have taken me far less time. Our guest tonight, his name is, I'm having a brain freeze. Our guest tonight is James Mapes. He is an actor. He is I believe he is a hypnotherapist. He is a motivational speaker, and he is the author of a book. Let me see if I can bring up there is his photograph, Mr. James Mapes. How are you doing tonight?
I am most excellent, thank you.
Excellent. How did you like my little brain freeze there? Wasn't that great?
Oh, my breath. You took my breath away there, Bill.
The name of his book is called Quantum Leap Thinking, An Owner's Guide to the Mind. I have just started reading this. This is a extremely interesting book. And I have also done a search on YouTube, and I've watched as many of the video clips of your conferences as I can on YouTube. Give us a little bit about your background, James.
Well, it is an eclectic background. I have always had 4 careers, and This was a dream I had, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and I have a small army of people to manage those careers. I got my master's in theater and my undergraduate in psychology, and from that point on, I kind of launched forth in this, and I got a Cal State University, and I went into 2 years of repertory theater. In one of those theaters, down in New Orleans, I saw a hypnotist as a fundraiser, and I thought it was all garbage. I mean, where I come from in the Midwest, like you say the word hypnosis, and the devil pops up. So people have these myths attached to it. So, but it scared me, but it intrigued me. So I did another season of repertory theater. I came back to New York to do soap operas and commercials and film, and I started studying hypnosis, which immediately led me into studying with a master who's written 60 books on this subject, Harry Aarons. So I had my own private practice in New York, the New York Hypnosis Center, and that opened up a whole other world. It pushed me into creating a stage performance that we ended up doing on Broadway 6 years ago. I started doing public seminars called Positive Self-Image Training and Choices. And then in 1982, a buddy of mine who was my manager talked me into going in the business world to speak. And that was the beginning of the Quantum Leap Thinking organization. And he, after bringing me into what was the most powerful speakers bureau at the time, I was exclusive with them for 26 years and just recently left to go out on my own. I have lectured in 70 countries and presented many different topics. My newest ones, which we can talk about later, are Imagine That. It's about the psychology of the imagination, how it applies to creativity and managing change, and then True Leadership, which is a totally different program about leadership than is out there, looking at what are the core traits of leaders, whether they're honorable or not. You can kind of scrape everything away and see the attributes that make leaders leaders. And the last one is called Patient Pre-Op Post-Op, which is preparing people for major surgery to help them heal faster, which is another quantum leap for me, and is just putting it as a pilot into Yale. So that, I still have all those careers going. I'm focused more than ever on finishing a new book called The Elephant and the Rider, Living an Exceptional Life, and that's about the unconscious and the conscious mind. That's been a 9-year project. This book was 14 years, Quantum Leap Thinking, an Owner's Guide to the Mind. So that's me in a nutshell.
And you are also an actor, are you not?
I was trained as one, and it's my... See, I don't play golf. I don't have a hobby. My business is my hobby, but my hobby is really acting. And so I still support actors, support institutions, because I think it's a valuable artistic growth opportunity for young people and business people. And I do 1 or 2 films a year. I'm in the process, as soon as I finish my next project, we're going to write a film, and I'm going to be doing that. I did one recently that's out April 24th on DVD. It just opened in the U.S. for a few weeks. It's called The Wicker Tree, which is a sequel to the 1973 thriller with Christopher Lee and Edward Woodward and Brett Eklund called The Wicker Man, directed by the same man, by the way.
Wow.
And I'll be doing the lead in his next film called The Wrath of the Gods, which I play a supervillain. And that, but that doesn't take a lot of the year to do that. The acting things are pretty short-lived.
And you actually have the, I guess, the dubious distinction of having served under not only Captain Kirk, but Captain Picard, too.
I was blessed with that. My first film was Taxi Driver back in the early 70s, and I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Rick Berman, who replaced Gene Roddenberry. And I'll never forget this. I flew out to California with the expectation that he might ask me to be in a film, but, I walked into his gigantic office where he had a statue of Gene Roddenberry blindfolded. And I said, well, why is that statue blindfolded? He said, so Gene doesn't see what I'm doing to his franchise. and so we talked for like 40 minutes, and he never mentioned anything about the film, and I was walking out of the office totally dismayed and befuddled and sad, and I touched the doorknob, and he said, James, and I turned around and said, would you like to be in my next film? Well, can you imagine? So I was in the undiscovered country playing a character called a Zelenite. I looked like a purple-faced bag woman, and it was a great character. First time they ever used phosphorescent makeup, and I got more play out of that role from all the magazines because I was the first one to wear that makeup. And then after that, I was asked to be in First Contact, and I had a nice role in there. Unfortunately, the third one, he wrote a role for me, and I couldn't do it because I had a lecture the same day of the shooting in Hawaii. And it was really a disappointment because they changed the shoot date, and so I didn't do an evil Klingon captain. But I've been to two or three conventions with a buddy of mine, Keir DeLay, who did the lead in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I got photographs made, and I mean, what a kick, signing photographs and making people happy, and it's just those conventions are just wild.
That sounds like it. When I saw that on one of the websites that you're on, that you were in actually 2 Star Trek movies, there's only a few actors that have been in both franchises.
I know.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, I know. It just was an accident. I happened to bridge the gap, because that was the last year. The Undiscovered Country was the first time the last year they did the original cast, and that was cool because I got photographs that I signed with DeForest Kelley, and then I had one with Jimmy Doohan and George Takei. So that was great. No way I could get one with Shatner because he was, kind of he was, let's just say, guarded. Although I did spend a lot of time talking to him, but I never mentioned acting. I only mentioned horse racing, and he opened up. Yeah.
Now, on your website, the James Mapes organization, that would be jamesmapes.com, folks. MAPES.com. When we originally got in contact with each other, I went over and looked at your website, and you have an article on there that's called The Paradox of Paradigms. And I found that article to be extremely interesting.
Well, let me talk a little bit about it, and it came out of I was hired to do a job for Marissan, and Marissan is the producer and marketer of the world's top sweeteners. And I talked to the guy. He read my book. This was like a rare thing where this happened, and he called 7-8 months ago, and he said, "James, I read your book. Do you speak?" I said, "What do you mean, do I speak? It's how I make my living." And I said, "You sure do, yeah." And I said, "What are you interested in?" And he said, "Well, I'd like you to do a keynote for the whole organization, 3 back-to-back breakouts following that." And my heart sunk because I had never done it. And then part of me went, "All right, so it's going to stretch you beyond your comfort zone." And I said, "So the keynote is on what?" He said, "Imagine that," which is my talk on imagination. I said, "What are the breakouts?" He said, "I'd like one on paradigms, and the second and the third one, you can divide it up between the traits of a true leader." And I said, "Well, let's talk about the paradigm thing," because I talk about paradigms and quantum leap thinking and so forth. But I also know that paradigms, for those of your listeners who don't know what a paradigm is, they're belief systems, but they are the boundaries, restrictions, or rules for how we live our life. I mean, society has paradigms. We have paradigms. Organizations have paradigms. Now, the interesting part is the paradigms that run us, that create us doing what we do or don't do, are the paradigms that are invisible. In other words, we don't know what they are. We can't see them. That's why they run us. And that really threw me and befuddled me, and what am I going to do? Because there's kind of 3 kinds of paradigms. One paradigm is the rules that society imposes on us that we don't agree with. For example, we shouldn't here in Connecticut. It's against the law to talk on a cell phone in the car. But yet I almost get clobbered 3 or 4 times a day with people talking on cell phones. Now they know that's the law, so that's a paradigm. That's a belief system that they accept being a citizen, but they don't follow. The second paradigms, for example, would be losing weight. We commit with ourselves that we need to diet because of our health. That's a paradigm. That's a belief. And then we cheat. So we don't really stick to the paradigm. Then there are the paradigms that cause us to make the choices we make or not make. Those are invisible. So how do you get someone to see something that isn't there? So I I called a buddy of mine, and that's the quote you got from Wayne Birkin. Wayne has been a friend of mine for 40 years. And Joel Barker, who was the original guy who brought paradigms into the marketplace, for the corporate marketplace, Wayne was the kind of pickup guy. He would do, if Wayne charged 30 grand, Joel would charge 30 grand, Wayne would pick up the ones for 10. And so, but he's a brilliant thinker. And I called him and I said, I need some help here. So I came up with some breakout sessions, and I'll tell you one of them. One of them was that the teams, I divided these people into teams of 5, and they had to go off and they had to create a 10-point strategy that would ensure their failure as an organization in 1 year. Now think about that. Yeah, but that's their assignment. Well, no, but no one talks about failure. They ignore it, and you're supposed to be successful. So once they created the strategy, 10-point strategy, they had to take each of those 10 points and mirror image them to a positive. And then they look at that list, and they chose one or two that was out of their comfort zone. So they came up with some fabulous ideas. So that was one of the breakouts. You have to approach it like lateral thinking. You have to approach it backwards to trick people into seeing the negative things that keep us in a box, so to speak.
So you told them you wanted them to come up with 10 ways that they can make their company fail, and then you made them turn it around 100%.
Right. And that kind of, because it tricks the brain, it changes that. Now, I will, for your listeners that like a visual image of this, I don't do my hypnosis demonstrations much anymore because I did them 1,500 times over the years, and I've kind of moved on to other things. However, there is a clip on YouTube, and it's called Woman in the Box, and it's one of my 2 signature demonstrations. And you can just get the suggestion, because if people understand with hypnosis, which is, by the way, a terrible word, you can create temporary belief systems or paradigms. So the suggestion is you're in a box, Bill, and it's 8 feet square. Mm-hmm. You're standing in the center of the box. You don't know you're in a box. It's impenetrable. You can only move in 4 feet in any direction, and you won't remember that I gave you that suggestion. So now I've set up a paradigm. So what I do is I'm on stage. I did this at Lincoln Center in Manhattan, and with an executive, and I walk 12 feet away, and I say, Bill, come over here. And you walk 4 feet, and you stop. And I go, well, come here. And you say, I can't. Wait a minute, I said, Bill, you're in front of an audience here of 1,000 people. What do you mean you can't? I don't know why I can't. So I pull out $100 bills, and I start to motivate you. I move around. I make you move around the box until I got $2,000. And you still can't get it. And I say, are you motivated? Of course I'm motivated. Then why can't you do it? Now, that's the demonstration, but then I open it up to discussion because people are boggled with this. And I go, well, let's use an example of arachnophobia, which is a fear of spiders. A phobia is a fear carried to an extreme. So imagine that you have a fear of spiders to that degree. And I put $1 million cash, and I say, here's $1 million, Bill. You hold this tarantula on the palm of your hand for 5 seconds. I will give you that $1 million. I know I can't lose because it's impossible for you to do it because you just couldn't because your fear base is so incredible. Well, that is the kind of example about that box. Our job to wake us up is, what is our box? I mean, the irony of this, you grow and you learn and you're still in a box, but what's the box that we're in, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and socially? What don't we have that we want? What don't we achieve that we've tried to do? And you start to examine and discover what that is, and it always comes down to fear. Always, always, always. And for rejection, change, success, failure, commitment, or poverty. And once you discover it, there are tools and tricks that you can use to identify and then break out of your box.
What are some of those tools and tricks?
Well, the first thing is awareness or consciousness. And you have to start, first of all, you've got to even be aware that you're aware. And I don't mean to be frivolous about that, but a lot of people don't think about their thinking. And if I give you a quick psychology lesson, you probably know this, but to your listeners, the mind's divided into 2 parts. And I've been absorbed in brain research and brain sciences the past 2 years because it's the cutting edge right now. And you look at the conscious, what is the conscious? Well, the conscious is a little voice in your head that you talk to yourself with. If you don't know what little voice that is, it's the voice that's going, what voice is this guy talking about? It's our self-talk. It's our rational, analytical self. And then there's the subconscious. And the subconscious is the seat of our emotions. It is the storehouse of our memories. And there are certain other attributes about the subconscious. It doesn't think at all in the traditional sense. It's a fight-or-flight mechanism with our primitive survival, which means you either go towards something or away from something. And it doesn't like to give a long-term sacrifice. It wants a short-term payoff. That's part of the makeup of the subconscious. And I've talked to numerous neurologists about this. And the subconscious controls 90% of our consciousness. In other words, we think we're in control of our choices, and we're actually not. We can't control. We can influence. And that word is a very, very, very important word for people to understand. Because if you think you can control your subconscious, then you think willpower surmounts imagination. And it doesn't. It never does. And on top of which, employing willpower actually drains our creative juices. So part of the process to discover this is to discover your fear, and you answer a couple questions. One is, what's the payoff? Once you know what your fear is, what's the payoff for having it? Because there's always a payoff. And the questions are, who do I get to avoid, or what do I get to avoid? So once you start to have the courage, by the way, that takes courage to look at, you start to see how fear manipulates us. I call that fear, I call it the great trickster, because there are different kinds of fear. And the great trickster is, for example, let's take the fear of rejection. Everybody has the fear of rejection. But if you're controlled by the fear of rejection, it manipulates you in an unconscious way to perform acts to achieve what's called the self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, the fear of rejection is the fear of isolation. That's what it is. So, if you're governed by that fear, I'm going to ask you this. What might you do or not do that could create you being isolated and not even know it? You wouldn't even know you're doing it.
Saying something stupid.
Saying something stupid, or becoming a bully, dominating, jealous, aggressive. Make sense? Because if I become possessive or a bully trying to control you, are you going to stick around? Well, no, not unless you're a masochist. And you're going to go away, and I'm going to go, why did Bill go away? My goodness, what's wrong with me? Or what's wrong with him? Now, that's one area. But the other area is, the flip side of the coin with all fears, polar opposite is, you decide to isolate yourself so no one can hurt you. So you don't network, you don't socialize, you cut yourself off, or you dump someone before he or she can dump you, and you because you protect yourself, and you end up isolated, and you don't know why. Well, that's rejection. Failure is easy. If the fear of failure manipulates you, what don't you take?
You don't take any chances.
Right. You don't take any risks. I like risks better because chances always kind of roll the dice. But risks, strategy, well thought out. You don't take any risks, so you can't fail. So you don't learn. So you've already failed. Or you take stupid risks without a strategy. So a great question about fear of failure and risk-taking is, what's the worst that can happen? And am I willing to have it happen? I call it the great leveler, because the imagination, the way the imagination works, we're programmed to be problem solvers. That's what we do genetically. And so if we don't have problems, how do we know who we are? And if we don't have problems, then we're going to create problems. The different way of looking at life is to discover what's working and do more of it. And ask the question, what's the worst that can happen? And I'm willing to have it happen. Because then you break apart what the imagination often does. It goes wild. It invents all these confabulated scenarios about stuff that isn't going to happen. Now that is risk-taking, failure, but there's also success. Fear of success is almost as big as the fear of failure, because people don't realize that sometimes they defeat their own success because they're afraid of the responsibilities, they're afraid that they're a target, and there are a lot of other fears that people have. Commitment. People are afraid of committing because if I commit, I'm trapped. They have a black and white observation of that. So there are all sorts of questions: rejection, change, success, failure, poverty. Poverty, I have a poverty mentality. I was born in the Midwest. Was born in 1945. I had that whole family that had the poverty mentality, so I grew up with it. So no matter how much I made, I spent more than I had, so that I would be in my comfort zone. And my comfort zone was what? Feeling poor. So I tried to save money, right? So I saved everything I made, and I still did well. I saved everything, but I felt poor because I didn't spend it. Then I invested everything in the stock market. I figured I knew enough about self-awareness, and I've been through enough processes to know, well, I'm gonna invest my money. I lost everything. So I finally got it, and I finally understood that there's abundance in the world, and that I don't have to make these choices to create a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's very interesting. I think a lot of us, well, those of us that were growing up in the 70s, in the early 70s, I think we went through the same thing with that staggering inflation that we had back then.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people are unemployed. People are unemployed right now. People are going through that right now, James.
Oh, it's a nightmare for people. I mean, it's a tough, because when you are in that kind of fear, what you forget to do, if you are, I look at it this way, if you are in desperate and you go for a job interview, that there is nothing as unattractive as desperation, because it comes from fear. Yet the reality is the reality. So I always suggest to people you have to somehow center yourself so that you become more attractive, you think clear, you become more creative. And part of the way you do that is, people hear this, but they're probably not going to do it anyhow, is to learn some kind of a meditation or relaxation exercise. But also to volunteer your time and to help other people, because it gets you outside of yourself. When I take private clients, I created something called the Transformational Coach Program. So when I take private clients, they could be CEOs, or they could be somebody could want to improve their golf game. But I make sure that one of the assignments people do is before they go to bed, and your listeners try this, it will transform their life, and it's so simple. You list 5 things for which you are grateful. Now that changes your mindset, because the brain can't focus on 2 things at once. So that automatically switches you to a positive. And the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, you quickly read the list, takes 10 seconds, and you circle one of those. So you start your day as best you can in a positive frame of mind.
Wow, that's a simple yet effective trick. I think
very effective. It never, by the way, it never fails.
I'm going to try that.
Yep, do it, please.
I'm going to try that tonight. 5 things that I'm grateful for.
Yep, and you can repeat the same things every night. You don't have to be creative about this. You just do the assignment.
And that actually segues us to a section of of your book that I wanted to talk about, and I picked this out. And I'm not sure when you wrote this particular part of the book, but it's called The Changing World. And let me quote from the refresh your memory on it. It says, "The world has changed. I believe now, more than ever, that the concepts of quantum leap thinking are the key to taking control of our lives. The events of the past 2 years have thrust the world into an age of anxiety."
An age of anxiety. Boy, do I remember writing that, and it hasn't changed.
No, I thought you wrote this in 2008.
Yeah, that's a little spooky, isn't it?
That is, that's what I thought, because I'm reading this and I'm going, yeah.
I wrote that in 1995.
Wow.
I wrote that in 1995. It took me 14 years to write this book. So managing change is a major, major, major area of life, and I think people don't think about their ability, because what happens, what the last couple of years, what brain science is showing, is people get crazed by a couple things. One is too much choice. Now, I spend 10 weeks a year with my wife down in St. Thomas to write. And what I love, I'm so creative. I write 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, And the reason is I've got 2 pairs of pants, 2 pairs of shorts, 5 shirts, 2 pairs of shoes, a pair of sandals, a couple bathing suits. So my anxiety, if I get home, I must have 1,000 books here. I must have 25 suits. I must have 20 pairs of... I go crazy trying to just make choice. So simplifying is a very important thing. And also not listen. People listen to news all the time. I'm telling you, it's exactly like a self-hypnotic suggestion. We see things that we can't control, and it makes us nuts. And we see this big thing that has to be done instead of breaking change down into small steps, manageable steps. And there's 3 kinds of change. One is crisis change, and I write about that in the book. And the crisis change is something happens to us, like losing a loved one or becoming unemployed or whatever it is, and we have to adjust to that until we get a new normal. And there's evolutionary change. I mean, we wait long enough, things are going to change. But there's also visionary change. And vision is extremely important for people to understand, because the unconscious, subconscious elephant, and again the elephant in the rider, doesn't think. The rider, this small part of our forebrain, the recent part of our brain, is the visionary. And the interesting thing is the subconscious can't tell the difference between a real or an imagined experience. I'll give you an example. You probably saw this on the clip, but I can do it visually. People can imagine. Imagine, this is how I start all my programs. I walk up on a stage, I take a lemon in my hand. And so it doesn't matter the size of the audience. And I say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to count to 3 and take a bite out of this lemon. And I want you to imagine or visualize biting the lemon with me. Now, in order to do that, you have to go back in your past and bring forth vividly what makes a lemon a lemon. You have to recall the color. You have to recall the texture. It's kind of bumpy. You have to recall the smell. It's a little tart. And I cut it in half, and I put it in my hand, and I squish out the juice, and you have to recall it's full of a bitter juice. So I count to 3, and I say, ready? Imagine 1, 2, 3. I plunge it in my mouth. You can see people cringe. And then I say, how many of you, when I can talk again, how many of you had some kind of a reaction to that? Now, out of an audience, whether it's 10 or the largest audience I've ever had, it's 10,000, what percentage do you think out of an audience that fast has a reaction to that?
Oh, I'd have to say at least 50%.
Okay. It is always the same. It is always between 93 and 95%.
Wow.
Always. And then I have people raise their hand, and people look and go, oh my goodness. And I said, if you get this, you're going to get my whole talk, because I ask you to imagine something. A group of people that don't know me, you don't trust me, and 95% of you created a biochemical, neurological change out of nothing in less than 1/10 of a second, simply by imagining, as we would imagine something fearful happen in the future. And your body goes crazy, and then you start to make stupid choices. So it's we have control. We just have to be aware that we have a control. That's why visionary change is so important. It's creating something that answers the question, what do I want to create? What do I want my ideal future to look like? And what can I control? And what can I control? Benjamin Franklin, I got this from a book I read about Benjamin Franklin years ago, and I give this as an exercise, and I've never heard anybody talk about it. Ben Franklin, whenever he had angst and stress, he would write down everything as fast as he could that vexed his spirit. And he'd give it a breath, and he'd go back and he'd cross out everything that he couldn't control. And then he'd go back and circle the stuff he could. Now, if you do that as an exercise, you immediately change your brain, because you've given the perceptual idea of control. Then you can go back and write a small action step for each thing. But that's very powerful in terms of what can you change, what can you let go. So to visualize a future, it's used in athletics, surgeons use it, pilots use it. I'm very big on visualization. It starts to imprint on your brain and begins to move you like the law of attraction, if you will. Although I think I think calling it the law of attraction is a little flighty. I think there's a reason that we attract things and we see things. It's like if I said, Bill, think of blondes for about 10 minutes, and I have you walk out, or thinking about seeing a blonde, walk out in a crowd of 1,000 people, you're going to notice blondes because your mindset is on that. Well, why wouldn't that work with everything? Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and socially.
Well, an example of that would be if you go out and buy a car. All of a sudden, you're seeing the same car all over the place.
Absolutely.
There's a million of them out there, and you've never seen them before.
As I said before, I bought my gas-guzzling Toyota Land Cruiser. I never noticed them, and then all of a sudden the world gave birth.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
Yeah, how did that happen? Why is it suddenly? I've worked with a lot of people that have drug issues. So who do they hang around with? I mean, they hang around with people that also have issues. That's why interventions break up the pattern of behavior, and they change the people that are around us. But we can do that for ourselves. If we want to grow, hang around with people that challenge us. Don't hang around with people that we can control and that look at us and listen to every word we say. I hang around with people that really challenge me. I mean, they're smart, whip smart, and boy, they call me on my garbage, and they introduce me to new ideas, and I do the same for them. So when I met my wife 25 years ago, we've been married for 10 years this summer, she said, I want to show you something. She brought me in her office, and she showed me something on the wall, and she said, this is the way I live my life. I hope you agree. And it said, I will not be around people that vex the spirit. And we live it. We live that. If we meet someone as a couple, and we go home and have a fight or we're grumpy, I can tell you it's probably the energy we picked up from someone else. You want people around that are loving and supportive, and even with family members, you have choice.
I am processing that right now. That is, that's pretty good. I'm trying to relate this into an example that's happened to me recently, and I'm having trouble doing that because I try not to have people around me that vex me.
or if you meet them, you make another choice. And vexing comes in many different forms. Guilt is the worst. See, I believe, and I teach this, and I believe there are only two emotions in life, period, love and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you can throw at me falls in one of those categories. So when one exists, the other can't exist. Guilt is about the worst form of fear. So if people make you feel guilty or you make yourself feel guilty, it is best in your best interest to deal with that quickly. It's why people can't say no, and then they become overwhelmed, and then they don't have enough time. Guilt is self-destructive.
How do you turn guilt around?
Well, you recognize it, and you make the choice to be conscious, to be awake and be aware, and choose to not do it. The first is awareness. I mean, if you react because it goes to the elephant, it is the subconscious. It's a primitive reaction, and so sometimes when we feel guilty, we don't even know, right? I mean, we just don't even know. We just feel that feeling. So part of what I teach people is how to become aware of your feelings. There's nothing wrong with it. We need to be in touch with them. They're signposts of what we should do or not do. We don't have to ever try to change a feeling. Just be aware, be with it. I guarantee it will shift in a short period of time. But when you're aware of guilt, you look at the reality of why am I choosing to feel guilt? Nobody makes us feel guilty. No one makes us feel anything. They trigger something within us, we feel it. So why am I feeling guilty? And once you identify that, you either say, okay, that's the payoff. I'm feeling guilty. Do I choose? Am I accountable and willing to continue doing that? And if you are, then own the guilt and feel what you feel, and then it lessens the quality of your life.
Yeah. Now, is that a learned response? Is that something that you can learn?
That is a mind technique. Everything I teach is how to manage the mind. How do we manage our mind? First of all, it all starts with awareness, and then it's learning the tools. Relaxation is some form of relaxation is mandatory. for my private coaching. Some form of reevaluating your vision. Vision is different from goals. A goal has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when it ends, well, we're either happy or sad. So if you only live out of goals, then you're always rushing to do the next thing. But a vision is a guiding force. It has different parts to it. It's something larger than ourselves. If I want to use the word spiritual, fine. If not, doesn't matter. Something bigger than ourselves. It's about other people and ourselves. It also is something that pulls us. It's based in our values. This is another exercise I do with people, is to get them to uncover their top values, what drives them, and ask the question, are my actions congruent with my values? Because if they aren't, you're never going to achieve any kind of contentment, because you're always, well, for example, if my number one value, say, is family, I'm making this up, and then I am off shooting around working and I'm gone all the time because my rationalization is, well, I have to make a living and blah, blah, blah. How can I possibly be content? I am not congruent with my number one value. So there has to be some kind of compromise. Now, in the book I talk about, there's like 50 values. They can be fun, they can be money, they can be integrity, honesty, relationship. It doesn't matter. So a vision is bigger than ourselves. It's like tying a giant rubber band around the future that keeps us moving forward. It's congruent with our values and congruent at the moment with our top priorities of life, which change and shift. So when people come to me, I have to get them to create a vision statement that's a small paragraph. It's a big deal. It isn't something you just go do. You measure, when that happens, once that's done and everyone can do it, you measure every goal that you choose against your vision. And I'll give you an example. First, an example. About 2 years ago, I was asked to do a film, acting in a film. Now, I'm like a child. It's like, did somebody say film? It's like I become a 5-year-old. Let's go play. Let's do movies. Well, I also am responsible to my coaching clients. I also am given my word about lecture dates. I also have deadlines to meet for articles in my book. So my wife said, have you checked this again? And I got sad because I knew what my vision was. And I had to look and say, you know what? This makes me immensely sad. I feel like a child that's pouting. But if I'm to live a life of integrity, I must not do this. And it was fine because I got another opportunity later. But that's what I'm saying, that we have to stay on course if we want to live an exceptional life. And what I teach is living an exceptional life.
So it's essentially what you're doing is learning a new way of thinking.
Yes. It's crafting your life. That's the beauty of the writer. That's what the gift of the conscious mind is. It's the animal. It also frets and worries and confabulates. So I'll throw something else out that most people don't know. I'll ask you this. If you look in your past, any time from being a little child up to the present, and you give me two memories that are either sad or happy, but memories, what would you, just off the top of your head, what would you choose?
Oh, boy. Two memories that make me sad or happy.
Yeah. Or stick in your mind, that stick out in your life.
Well, when my grandfather died, that made me sad.
Okay, that's a powerful memory. Mine, too. And what else?
And the first brand new car that I bought myself. That would make me, that was a happy experience.
Yeah, okay. Now, what's the commonality between those two is an emotion. Now, remember what I said at the beginning. The subconscious elephant is the center of our emotional self. Our memories don't record like a video cam. This is all brain science have shown this lately, and that is that what happens is we take snapshots, and all the powerful snapshots that are emotionally based, you look back, those memories are true memories. But the imagination, beautiful thing that it is, then fills in the gaps, which are probably about 95%. It confabulates. That word means it makes up stories. So then we look at our life as a story, but it's not real. But then we believe it's real. And the way you would know this is getting together with a bunch of friends that experienced something, or family, and you all have different points of view. You go, where were you? Where was I? I mean, Well, when people start to understand that, then you flip it around and look in the future. When you look in the future, you say, all right, if I want to create something that pulls me towards that future, whether it's healing or getting through surgery or accomplishing a goal, I have to specifically craft a script and live in that as if it were already, and I'm standing in the result, and write a description of that and base it in a memory. How do I feel? Excited, relieved, and you craft it and you work it. You visualize it 4 or 5 times a day. How can you not move towards it? That's the way the brain's built.
That's a new concept for me. What I was trying to do is lead into the subject of the circle of learning.
Well, there's a base of quantum leap thinking which is extremely important, and I put all my points of quantum leap thinking on top of continuous learning, creativity, and managing change, because one feeds into the other, and if you don't go through the cycle, and one is learning, well, one is problem solving, and and then there's also the willingness to learn. In other words, you don't want to be arrogant. The cycle of learning is this. We know that we know. I mean, if you start at the bottom, we don't know, right? We just are ignorant of, and I use that word, I guess I mean it when I say it, we're unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Then we know that we don't know. In other words, we're aware that we don't know something, and we can look at that different ways. We can either be excited and go in and learn, or we can feel terrible, and then you go up to the next step. We know that we know, and I call that the state of arrogance. We know that we know. And then eventually we don't know we know, because it becomes an unconscious memory. So we look at the circle of learning, and we look at that, and we look at things start with a question,
mm-hmm.
and that's why I think questions are so valuable to ask ourselves and other people. We contemplate that. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I've got your diagram of the circle of learning up on the screen. Oh, good.
So the folks on YouTube that are watching this, they've been seeing this, and they're going, what the heck is this? This is what we're talking about, the circle of learning. I keyed in on that on the book, and
good.
it just hit me right between the eyes.
It's powerful, because this is, we contemplate something, we have an idea, and then we have to test the idea, so you have to be open to failure, and then you learn something, you reflect on it, you go back and you ask another question, or you put it into our life. And part of it is, we are judgment machines. That's part of the curse of the writer. We judge everything, bad,
mm-hmm.
wrong, blah, 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 blah. But if you start to become aware when you judge other people or yourself to be bad or wrong or whatever it is, and you instead you ask a question, you turn it into curiosity. And once you become curious, you ask people questions. I do this at dinner parties. I don't judge anybody. I just ask a lot of questions, because you start to know them, and then they start to know themselves.
So the circle of learning. These are questions for yourself, or questions that are exterior.
How do I market my new program, or how do I get rid of a fear, or how do I, it doesn't matter. Or my private practice, I have to ask people questions. I have to churn them up. I have to wake them up. I have to get them to look inwards safely.
And I'm looking for something that I highlighted in the book, where most people get stuck at one point.
Yes.
In this cycle of learning. What is that?
Well, what would you think?
Since I can't find it in the book, I'm going to have to take a stab at it. You
could get stuck at any of the points.
I would think the one that people would get stuck at most is contemplation, and I'll tell you why. When I talk to people, and I tell them, look, you know what, the economy it's quite possible the economy could melt down, and we're all going to be living out in the street wondering what in the heck just happened. Doesn't it make sense to get yourself a little bit of spare food? Keep a month's worth of food in your house, canned food, whatever. And everybody says, I ought to do that. I really ought to think about doing that. Or saving money. Yeah, I ought to do that. they contemplate it, and then they don't move on from that.
Or they start to judge their idea to be wrong. If you get stuck in judgment, you're done. It's curiosity that keeps people moving. The curiosity of a child, always being a beginner. That's why in all the years of studying martial arts, the beauty of it was every time I went in the dojo, I had to do the beginning. I hated it. I had to go back to the basics. But I always was given, based on my forward movement, given something new, so I never felt like I was a master. I was always a beginner. I was always learning, and that became really a solid metaphor for me.
Maybe that's why I like doing this show so much. I'm always learning.
Well, good. Yeah, absolutely. You are. That's beautiful.
And sometimes, sometimes I feel bad because I'm not a complete expert on anything. But what I try to do is I try to have experts in any particular subject on the show.
Then you get to even have it better because you get coaches.
Well, and I get to ask them questions.
Absolutely.
And the audience gets to ask them questions too, and we don't have any questions this evening right now.
Well, you've asked me a lot.
Yes, I am trying to make up for what the audience normally does. Again, the internet appears to be a little bit cattywampus tonight. I was actually having some problems this morning trying to get into my own server out in Utah, and it turned out it was the internet and nothing to do with the server whatsoever. So it's been going on most of the day, but people will be able to watch the recording and.
Good, and then they can email me. I mean, I'm James@jamesmapes.com. I mean, sometimes I get overwhelmed with email, but I always answer my own email.
I will put your email up on the YouTube channel.
And on our website, I do a syndicated column every month, although I'm 1 month behind in the 7 newspapers because I've been working on my book. And then I put it on my website, The Paradox of Paradigms. So it goes out, and it's in Hearst Publications and Arizona Reporter. But then it goes on the website, and people can sign up for my monthly email, and I send that off. I mean, if you're on my mailing list, I give a little update of what's going on and new things. There's very few things because I'm not much of a salesperson. So then I send the article off for people, so it's free. I mean, they can be on my mailing list. I got about 15,000 people and love to have more. And it helps families, it helps friends, it helps organizations, corporations.
Well, we'll get the link to your website up all over the place too.
Excellent.
And going back to the circle of learning, I'm just I don't know why, but for some reason it really tickled my brain. Maybe it's because I guess I already do this, what you're talking about, and it seems to me the people that I talk to and the people that ask me questions and that I interact with, they never get all the way around that circle. They only get part way around it. How can we convince people or show people how to continue around that circle until it's completed?
Well, I don't know that you can convince anyone of anything. I think you can open them up to know that the quality of life and living an exceptional life and being a model for other people and helping other people grow as well as yourself requires continuous growth. That cycle of discovery. You don't know you don't know. You know you don't know. And then you go to you know, and then all of a sudden it becomes part of your paradigm, part of your belief system. And then you want to grow. I do this all the time. I find that I am constantly, I don't know what boredom is, let me put it that way, because I don't allow myself to get bored, so therefore I have to continue to stretch myself. It's all about waking people up to take charge and be accountable for their life and know that they can have an exceptional life. Doesn't mean you don't get sad or angry or discontent, but it means that you're not there very much because you're on. If you help other people and you teach other people, you get to learn. I teach what I need to know. When I start really to know what I need to know, I go to a new level. And that's maybe part of my mom and part of my upbringing, but it's certainly I reinforce it with the people in my life, and that's part of what people need to stop and contemplate is, am I hanging around with the right people to support my growth. If they don't want to grow, you're not going to make them grow. They can listen to all the shows they want. It's like people come in to see me speak, right? A corporation hires me. I can guarantee you 95% of what I say is forgotten when they leave the room because they don't pay for a ticket to come in there. They're asked by their supervisor. So I've got to take the people that are awake and the people that get it and encourage them to be a teacher, well, whatever that means, to get groups, to be a leader, to be a manager, whatever it means, to engage people. That's what I do.
And how do you go about dealing with rejection?
Well, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I mean, there's two things people must do to be growth-oriented. Make friends with failure and make friends with rejection. That I learned early in my acting career. I'd go into an audition, and if I get rejected, I used to take it's about James Mapes. Well, it isn't about James Mapes. It's about I didn't look right, I was tall, I go in front of an audience, I'm an honorable person, I speak from my heart. There are going to be people out there that don't like me. I mean, out of 100 people, 2 people may give me a black mark because of something. Well, I mean, you just look at that and you go, okay, that's their belief. So it's part of the encouragement.
Okay.
Bill, I have to ask you. I have to stop and ask. What is our time frame here?
We don't have a set schedule. We've got about 10 minutes. Is that good with you?
About 5.
5 is good. It's 7:55. I was planning on going an hour, and we got 5 minutes left. In that 5 minutes, I would like to touch on something that is also in the book that goes like this. Many of us believe that intelligence alone should be able to solve problems in both our personal and business relationships. And that leads us to a false assumption, doesn't it?
It does. I call it the intelligence trap. And that means that it's like thinking willpower conquers all. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't because it drains us. But breaking out of the intelligence trap is knowing that creativity is not about intelligence. That we have to get out of our ego to think we have all the answers. We have to, we don't have to do anything, but you know what I'm saying, is that part of it is we are not the center of the universe. And so being creative means doing something differently to challenge our assumptions. We have assumptions about everything. My values are your values. My rules are your rules. The world should operate either this way or that way. Those are assumptions. And we have to at least quiz them. That's part of, to me, the learning process. And know that there's more than a second right answer. There's often 2 or 3 right answers. And so intelligence restricts us, although it's necessary. I mean, intelligence means that I think being curious and creative thinking are far more important than logic. Morton Hunt, who authored a wonderful book called The Universe Within, says creative ideas come to the intuitive person who can face up to the insecurity of looking beyond the obvious.
You know what? While you were talking about intelligence, the word that came to my mind was curiosity. Intelligence does you no good whatsoever without curiosity.
Nope. And judgment and how you become curious, it's a choice, and to start to recognize when you judge and say, instead of judging, let me find out more information about that person, about this subject, about fear. By the way, this is a good ending. All fear cannot stand up under scrutiny. So the moment you start to learn everything about what you're afraid of, your prejudice starts to shrink, your fear starts to shrink. Ignorance creates fear.
That is exactly. It's ignorance. That's an excellent way to think of it, and you are right. That is an excellent way to finish up. And I would like to thank you very much for coming on the show. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, this has been a wonderful experience for me. Send me a link, and I will put it out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and my website, and we'll move our audience forward.
Yes, we'll move our audience forward. Remember, intelligence does you no good without curiosity. I thought that was, along with the circle of learning, I thought that was quite telling for this interview. James, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Bill. It's been a great pleasure.
Okay, thank you, and we will be in touch.
Thank you.
Yep, have a good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, that was James Mapes. He was our guest for tonight, and as you see on the screen, many of us believe that intelligence alone should be able to solve problems in both our personal and business relationships. And as James said, and I'm going to finish up, he had to go because we were talking before the show and he has a few things to do that he has a time schedule on. Think about this. The guys that invented this country, the ones that came up with the idea, they were highly intelligent, but they were curious as to how to come up with a new way of doing things. How could we break free of being under the rule of the king and do it better? They were curious about it. That is, the true scientists, Einstein and Copernicus and all the rest of them throughout history, they were all highly intelligent, but they had an insatiable curiosity. And that is one of the things that I think we all need to work on, is our curiosity. Build up your curiosity. Wonder how things work. Don't just assume they work. Don't just turn on the TV and plop your fat butt down and eat potato chips. How does that TV work? How does the technology work? Set about learning about that, and before you know it, you'll be learning about a lot of different things. So, that said, that is tonight's show. I appreciate everybody showing up. We should probably do another live show tomorrow night on April 12th, where I am sure we will have many more interesting things to discuss. This will be up on YouTube, and those of you that are listening on the audio side, this show will begin repeating as well as on the video side. Have a good evening, and thank you for stopping by.